Today's guest is Sam Sakr, an Australian musician, sound artist, and producer. He has written for artists like Sarah Aarons, Dua Lipa, Cardi B, Rae Jepson, the Veronicas, and many more. His introspective solo project, Sakr, blurs the line between sound design and electronic music, creating a world of his own. My name is Giovanni, and this is Let's Talk Music with Frap Tools. Thank you, Sam, for being with us today.
No worries, of course.
I usually start by asking our guests what their musical journey has been. So I would like to know how you became a musician and more specifically, how you end up playing the modular synthesizer and why.
So I started my musical journey, I got a scholarship in Sydney, Australia for singing, and I was in like year 5, so I was like a little kid. But I'd always been interested in music, which was kind of quite interesting because I don't come from like a musical family or anything like that. But I just was really into music as a kid. So I started singing, and it was a requirement that if you're a soprano singer in the choir, you had to play a soprano instrument. So I played violin for a few years. Back when I was younger, if I was to pick up a violin now, I'd have no idea what to do with it. And then I sort of moved away from that. I always had a keen interest in drums. So by the end of year 6, which is about like 12 years old, I picked up drums, and then I played drums all the way through, I guess even till now. But I went and studied a bachelor's degree majoring in drums. And then from there, I actually didn't finish the degree. I had 3 subjects left, and I left.
Like all the greatest artists, we might say.
Yeah, so. I left. I was playing in a band at the time, and that was really fun, but I always loved being in the studio more. So I had this like real interest in what the engineer was doing all the time. And I always wanted to say stuff a little bit more harmonically and melodically. So I had this interest to go learn how to produce music. And I enrolled myself into Ableton Live School, which is a Sydney-based like Ableton training place, the center sort of thing. And they have like a sort of like a degree called Produce Music. At the time it was called Produce Music. I'm not sure what it's called now. And I started going to class there, learning how to produce. And then from there, I like a bunch of opportunities opened up for writing for other people and producing for other people. And it kind of ended up, like that being my job, and currently is still my job. So that was kind of like the background of how I got to this side of music making. And still a majority of my time has been behind a drum kit, more so than synths and instruments. But I once when I was learning to produce, my obsession became with sound design. You know how some people like lean towards mixing or arranging, all these things. I really lent into sound design. I found it really, really rewarding and fun. You know what I mean? It was one of those things where I found it so easy to get into my like flow state, just sound designing.
Yeah. So if we want to make a very, not a necessarily useful distinction, but we can say that your path as a musician took a sort of detour through the path of an engineer before returning to electronic music and synthesizer, because you kind of were drawn more towards the technical aspect of studio life as a drummer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I initially sort of enrolled into the Ableton school, my I didn't necessarily have like a particular trajectory in mind. What I knew I liked was I liked being in the studio. I really like was curious about what the engineer was doing, what a mixing desk was, and all that sort of stuff. But I also just knew that I wanted to say something artistically outside of a drum kit, and I didn't have the knowledge or the tools to do that prior to learning how to produce. Yeah. So that's kind of been my life for a good while now, just sitting around synths and making music. In terms of getting to modular and Eurorack, I was on a riding trip to Berlin. I was in Berlin, and I really wanted to I think I had a day off. So I sort of was like, oh, I'll go to like a music store and play around with some synths and just, I don't know, do something. And I went to, there's like a really like popular Eurorack store in Berlin. I can't pronounce it. It's like starts with S.
Schneidersladen.
Yeah.
Yeah, Schneidersladen.
Yeah. I walked in there.
The Eurorack store.
The Eurorack store. Absolutely. I see it. It pops up everywhere.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what it was. I'd always seen it around. I'd seen it in photos of studios and whatnot, but I was just like, I just don't. It was such a foreign part for me. I was so I guess I was quite like dedicated and still learning so much just about closed architecture, synthesizers and whatnot, that I just my brain didn't even go there. Anyway, so I went there, and I think I spent like half the day just sort of playing around and recognizing how open it is, and how you can it's just so like tactile and it's just you can do anything and put anything anywhere, and I was just like super like fascinated by it. And then of course I asked how much something was, and then I was like, nah. Cool. So I went back. Was back in Australia, and this was all around the time of COVID. So I had a motorcycle, and I was like, I'm gonna sell my motorcycle and start my Eurorack journey. So what a perfect time. I can't go anywhere. It's the perfect time to learn how to do this and commit. So sold my motorbike, which I was sad about, but my parents were stoked. And I really sort of slowly started buying Eurorack modules. I did some research, because obviously there's so many options and what should you get first and this and that, when you're first getting into it, that I decided that I need to come up with like a concept for the instrument itself. Over time that has like moved, but the initial concept was I wanted to make an instrument with the thought or like the philosophy behind, how we talk about shadows and how they always, how you can kind of consider a shadow in the past. So like if there's a shadow of something and you're like, oh yeah, you could think of like, oh, that's like in the past. But my brain's always like, but it can only be cast in present light. So I had this concept of a shadow being cast, but what story that tells depends on where you're standing. So if you're standing directly in front of something, the shadow looks, vertical here. But if you like shift to the left or something, the shadow starts to angle a different way. So that concept, but with sonics. So having a song and then repurposing that through a Eurorack system as if standing in a different position, looking at that song's shadow at a different angle. I'm probably not explaining that very well, but
No. I'm following along. Yeah.
yeah. So
Because a shadow, of course, can be very deceptive. Because I mean, when you make those figures with your hands and you're tricking somebody to think that there is something else standing in front of the light. So because it's like a two-dimensional and just with two dimensions and two colors also, because it's dark over bright, and that's it. So maybe I am following along, but yeah. Please.
So essentially, I just wanted to make a Eurorack system that was sample based, because I wanted to feed my songs stems and repurpose them to create a new thing. That's how I initially sort of started the Eurorack journey. It has now moved into many many directions, but I still have that one thing inside where I have like a little system in front of me here which still has that very, very particular purpose. And then I just got so obsessed with it. It's probably been the most important thing I've learned since learning how to use Ableton. It just rejuvenates me every time. I find it very, very inspiring to use a Eurorack system. So yeah, I started there, and then I, just as you learn more about it, as you watch more YouTube videos about things, suddenly you need all these oscillators and whatnot. And then, yeah, so what is it, like 4 years later or something like that, 5 years later, I'm obsessed with it, and I'm so thankful I haven't got like a buckets and buckets of money, because I would just have walls and walls of Eurorack.
Do you still miss your motorcycle?
Yes. I do miss my motorcycle. But what I do think I would do these days is I would love a motorcycle to just go out to the countryside, a one Sunday every month or something, and just kind of like ride around where there's not like a bunch of crazy people in cars just trying to get from A to B. So I wouldn't make it my main form of transport anymore, but it is very, I find it very freeing to be on a motorcycle, But I have a push bike now, which is great.
Speaking of freedom, I have a question about what you said about earlier. When you first met the modular synthesizer in person, it seemed to me that you had a very naive attitude towards it. You weren't expecting that thing as you first encountered it, and then you kept thinking about it, and then you embarked in the journey sometimes later. But at that time, were you already aware of, or have you found some limitations in closed system, the synthesizers like hardware synths or soft synths and so on? Or were you already perhaps programming with modular environments? I don't know, perhaps Max MSP or this kind of thing. I mean, were you already trying to get outside the fixed architecture, or is it something that was born with your first encounter in person?
No, I think it was definitely me always running into these like particularly modulation limitations within closed architecture synths and drum machines. I would then work around that via using some like MIDI information from Ableton to that particular synthesizer to add random LFOs or more envelopes to certain parameters that are CC programmable within the synth, if I've run out. But I think it probably was more of a subconscious thought rather than an active thought. So when I was doing that with synthesizers and all of that, I was never going like, how do I make something to get out of this sort of issue I run into. It sort of naturally occurred when I started learning more about modular and like Eurorack, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It would like I organically found how open Eurorack is. I wasn't sitting at a synth going like, you know what, I really need a Eurorack system because I'm really struggling with doing this. It was just a natural thing that happened. I was like, oh, this is the thing that I've been trying.
That's it. Yeah. Because I think that the modular synthesizer, on a modular synthesizer, there are some things that are incredibly easy to achieve, and at the same time, they are extremely counterintuitive on closed synths. Like, for example, a drone. I mean, if since we briefly hinted at the aspect of carefully refining a sound as a sound designer perspective, and not being bound to actively play the device, pressing keys and keep listening. I think that takes off a huge load and then allows you to focus more on the sound itself. And having an instrument whose oscillator keeps flowing unless you work extra hard to put some constraints to that is a bit more cumbersome if you want to recreate the behavior of a keyboard instrument or like the articulation of a melodic instrument. But I think that it is very immediate and practical and fun if you want to focus on the sound before the note.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think for the first year and a half of using a modular system, I barely thought about the concept of like, putting a gate to an envelope to then a VCA. It was just like the last thing in my mind, because that, to me, it's just like, well, I've had so many synths that have that built in when you press a key. I loved like, the clock coming from something else rather than, a gate from the sequence or whatever, and deciding when something pings or opens and closes from like a completely different source that's not related to the sequence itself or anything like that. All these sort of unique and experiences you have with using Eurorack, I was really, really like obsessed with, and I think the only time when I started using like a gate at the point where you want like say an ARP sound and you need an envelope and you're using it like a normal subtractive type synth, is when I started getting really familiar with the oscillators, and I would be writing music and I would hear that I need to use this oscillator for this sound. I know how to get there with that oscillator. At that point that's when I would use the modular synth in a more like subtractive closed way, like in its basic form of how you would usually use a synth. But it's often not too much the case whenever I like sometimes when I get the chance, I do patching Sundays where I just use my synth, my modular synth. And I just get like everything is from that. It's just like a one patch, one piece from the modular synthesizer. And I'm never thinking of it that way unless I hear it.
And I was speaking of patching and the role of synthesizer into in songwriting. I mean, you are a producer, and so you have the produced songs for quite a few number of big names out there, and I was wondering if your creative workflow is somehow different than when you are writing something for yourself, like for your current project, or not. And also, if there is a difference, how do you approach, for example, the modular synthesizer when you're working for somebody else and when you're working for yourself?
That's a big question. I definitely have different approaches to when I am songwriting and producing for other artists as to myself. When I am songwriting and producing for another artist, I am there to help facilitate and realize that artist's vision. So that might come in different forms. Sometimes an artist will come in and be like come with a story about their life or a dream they had or whatever it may be, and that's quite like it's word driven. So within those words, you find the emotion from it, and then you start thinking musically how to depict that. Other artists come in, they're like, oh, I really just want to make a song that sounds red. And you're like, okay, let's make a song that sounds red. And often that's when I'm kind of like, so what have you been listening to? Let me give you some sort of gauge. But that approach is incredibly, it's very collaborative. And the way Eurorack comes into those sessions, which are generally geared in the more pop spectrum, it comes in two different ways. Sometimes I'll have someone come in the room, an artist come in the room, who's genuinely curious about this weird spaceship, looking thing, and they sort of just get up and start looking at it, and I'm like, oh, do you want to have a play? And then I'll give them the quickest 101 Eurorack rundown you've ever seen. I'll patch a few cables and make sure that the stuff they're turning is working, and I'll make sure the oscillator's in the key or whatever, and then I'll just hit record, and then they'll just be like, oh, I really liked this sort of thing, and it's there, and then I can use it within their song. And there's this beautiful moment where the artist feels so attached to the sonic palette of the song, because they've had this tactile experience of being a part of that, which is awesome, because it's they get this little insight to why I use these things. The other element of using Eurorack in the session world is often inspiration isn't there. It's, I think it's, as a creative, you're always kind of sort of working with inspiration, and then you start writing when you feel inspired, when you hear the song, or when it's just in you, or I'm sure you've had days where you're like, how did I just do that? Why can't I do that every day? It just sort of just comes through you. That doesn't happen every day, but when your job is to write music every day, you need a particular skill. You need a bag of tricks and skill sets to break free of that writer's block that you're feeling, because often you have a day to write a song. So what modular is really, really good at, which software is it can be too, depending on what sort of plugins you have or what you use. But what I find is happy accidents within the Eurorack realm are much more fruitful than within staring and I don't know, something about it versus clicking around on a mouse or searching through samples. So often I'm using things just sing into the granular module or the looper module, or just turn this over and over again, and then they'll be like, oh, I love that, let's use that. And then it just sets up a mood, a palette to go cool, there's something to write chords to, or a drum beat to, or a bass line. So yeah, Eurorack is kind of magical in that way. It's just for the artist, it feels like this really grown up toy, which is how I kind of see it anyway. I'm sure a lot of people do, but yeah, it's so good at speaking back to you and finding something to then build something around. And what's beautiful is it works the other way too. Once you have something that's like a foundation there, I find Eurorack this like beautiful, like the sprinkles on top stuff. So works really well in that way too. So that's how I approach writing and Eurorack to my songwriting producer side of creativity. For my artist side of creativity, it's a different process. I'm usually working by myself, which is yeah, it can be really tough because you know, as a lot of
like on the verge of alienation almost.
Absolutely. And like you second guess everything. You there's nothing like pushing you to like continue. Like you just like if you're feeling a bit like flat or whatever, it's so easy to just be like, I'm just gonna watch YouTube, and like it's just you're left to your own devices so much. But the approach for the Sakr stuff is a lot more exploratory. So I don't go in with the preconceived idea that there's going to be a structure, that there's going to be like almost like a formula to fit, that there's anything like that. It's more just like switch on all my gear and, you know, arm all the tracks, press record, and then just play. It's like just play stuff. It sounds bad, it sounds good, it sounds bad, it sounds good. Just keep playing, and then I will like, you know, like sift through all those recordings and find these little bits I like. So it's kind of like throwing all the paint at the board, you know what I mean? And I've gotten so accustomed to like what I have around me and the instruments that I use, that it doesn't feel like I'm restricted by the if I want something to happen in my head, I can usually make it happen with the gear. I by no means know everything about the stuff that I own, but I the sounds that I hear in my head I know how to make because they often like they're similar. So then I'll go through all that stuff, pick the parts I want, and then if you can imagine, like, I don't know, I always imagine like that's all on the canvas, and then I've like sawed the canvas in all these little blocks, and then I rearrange the blocks to make a different canvas, and then that will lead me to this like idea for a track. And then from there, I start exploring the arrangement of those things, and I sing on my music, so I might go like, okay, cool, there's way too much happening here, which is where I want some vocals, so I got to start removing stuff and figuring out maybe there needs to be more of a solid chord progression. So then I start like replacing sounds and you know, doing all that sort of stuff. In terms of Eurorack with my stuff, it's probably the most common thread throughout all my music. But I don't use it in the sense of, I use it for like, I'll make one sound with the system, then I'll pull that patch up and then make another sound that I'm hearing with the system. I think why I do that is, the mix of it, like I want to have the stems separated, which I actually find quite annoying because sometimes there's 2 or 3 sounds that are working really, really well together when it's coming out of the system through a stereo output, and it's that beautiful thing of these things are interacting, which is another beautiful part of Eurorack. And then you record it separately, and then you play those 3 stems back, and it sounds stale. There's the life.
Absolutely.
The life is gone.
Yeah.
It is a really I don't know how to solve that problem yet, other than like just record the stereo out. It sounds good. Use it. The issue I'm having there is my music is mixed in Atmos.
I see.
And Atmos needs a certain amount of stems in order for it to work.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes if I can't, like, if, you know, the way around that I try and solve that problem is I'll group those stems, and then I'll add some, like, bus processing to them, like a group processing, and try to like match what I'm hearing from the modular system, and kind of work like that and try to figure it out. But it's just never the same. But it's just,
you are using the CGM as your mixing stage, right? Yeah, that's a problem. Or a solution according to the point of view. But I mean, it's something that I found also myself, and because sometimes it just sounds good already as is. But I was speaking with Antonio, our main designer, electronic designer, and he had a phase in which he was working as a live engineer, and he was doing some mixes also, and he just wasn't satisfied with the sound of certain DAWs. He's one of those guys, you know. So I'm not mixing on that DAW because it sounds bad. You know, hard truths over there, you know. And he had the time where he was just doing, he was mixing on an analog desk and having this kind of external processing. And because it was just faster for him, I think that as long as it makes your workflow easier, having an analog sum, it can be, I mean, a bit. Yeah, I mean, I can understand the struggle of mixing in Dolby Atmos, because that's basically just not compatible. But I also know that, if that mixer is designed for a stereo sum, then comparing that stereo sum to another mixer or even a DAW stereo sum can be really different.
Yeah.
I mean, and I am not very skilled as a mixing guy, but sometimes I really just come up with a sound that just works, you know, and that sound in multi-track just doesn't work in the same way.
It's such a pain. Like it really bothers me every time. It's not something that I've gotten used to or anything, but I definitely just know I just need the separate stems. And I think it's only for when I'm making a song that is like very layered already, that I know is going to be like really mixed. And it truly depends on the sound. Like sometimes if everything's within the same sort of part of the spectrum and it's like it's working together, I treat it as one sound anyway. But when I've like gotten carried away, meaning like if I've got like this nice sort of like textural thing going on, and then I'm like, oh, what if I just add a bit of this like harmonic element, and then I put that in, and then they're working together really well. And then I might go, oh, what about if there's like an octave lower of that same sequence or something, and then I get carried away over here, and then I get it sounding how I like it on the system. That's when it becomes a problem for like putting just that in by itself in the track. It's now taking up way more of the spectrum, and it like I kind of have to separate them, but I lose all that. I don't know, like as you know, all those sounds feeding into one thing to then go over here. Everything's reacting and adding to the sound, adding harmonics or doing this or doing that.
Yeah, because I mean, every mixer is different in that regard, because at the end of the day, on an analog mixing desk, you're basically creating two electric signals. So one for the left channel and one for the right. But so the whole components that you're using to create this complex waveform are just part of the sound, and sometimes they make really everything much easier. I mean, I started using compressors on my DAW, and it is something that, I mean, it's very flexible, but it needs very like a lot of caution and awareness. And I was surprised by how forgiving analog equipment is as far as the setting goes. Because you can just sometimes you just tweak a knob and it's fine. But if it is, just slightly to the left or slightly to the right, it works the same. And you cannot afford this kind of simplicity with the DAW. You need to be extremely meticulous as for which setting you're dialing in.
Yeah. It's the, ones and zeros feel very different.
I remember that I was talking with Antonio when I had to set up my small recording setup at home, and I was like, what should be the best, because I have some synthesizers, and I was like, should I get myself a very large audio interface and mix everything through that, and then use patch bass? And he was like, why don't you get a mixer? And I was like, well, but the mixer can change my sound. I had this very naive approach where the more things you put between your source and your recording system, the more altered the sound becomes. And he was like, yeah, but maybe the alteration is an improvement.
Yeah.
And this is...
Yeah.
I mean, it's true that the sound is different, but maybe it's better,
Yeah.
So this is where I realized that sometimes the digital world offers solutions to problems that you don't have.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like, you invest a lot of time, energy, and money into all this, this stuff that works really well together and has a sound. And all the developers and engineers and all that who have gone into building them have made sure that the sweet spot is this big, not this big.
Yeah.
And then I this morning I literally had the same problem. I was making a drum groove through the Electron analog rhythm, and I had it's all going through their like analog distortion and symmetry stuff, and then it's going through their analog compressor on here, and then it's going through an auto boom. Have you seen? Yeah, it's like a distortion compressor box.
Yeah,
and I'm really happy with how it sounds. And then I just had this sinking feeling of going like, I have to go in and I got to track the kick drum separately, the hats separately, the this, the that, and it's all gonna change. It's all gonna change, and then I'm gonna have to work so hard just to sort of get all that back. Luckily, I've sort of got my way around that sort of thing, and sort of with the modular, but it's never quite the same. There's something so real and so it's just never the same. It's such a thing in my brain that I've almost thought about starting projects where I'm like, this can just be this stereo out from everything that's happening. But it has such a different sound to what Sakr is as a project at the moment.
Yeah.
That I have to approach it from a stem by stem basis. Yeah.
This is all I am. This is all I am.
Would you like to talk a bit about Sakr and if it is something that you wanted to do before becoming a producer, or if it is something that became naturally throughout the journey, and what were your releases so far, and if you're working on something new, since we talked about Dolby Atmos?
Yeah. So I think as I said before, I think I've always wanted to be an artist, because I got into production because I wanted to say more through my music. I have said forever and still say that music is easily my best form of communication. I'm not super great otherwise, in social situations or, even this, I'm I'm not going to remember what I said. I'm just going to be panicking. So music is my best form of communication. And I think that writing for people and producing for people is amazing. And I get to collaborate with people. But I think the Sakr projects where it's this is just me, what I have to say. So I always knew that I wanted to do it. I kind of just I fell into producing and writing, and it just took up a lot of my time, my creative energy, and it just was like it was a source of income. So for so many years, that was just all I did. I didn't get like the chance or the opportunity or have the brain space to make Sakr happen. But then I did find brain space and creative energy to start Sakr properly as a project, and that's when I released an EP this year called Structures, and it was just like it was such a like that was such a goal for me. Like I had never released an EP for myself. I've written a lot of them, but I finally did one myself. So that was like a really, really great moment. So I released that EP this year, and I've been super fortunate that I'm working with like a label called Platoon, and my A&R, whose name is like John Berry. He's super, super great with electronic music and has such a great ear. He's been helping me like push out that music and you know, start me as an artist, which is, as I'm sure you know and a lot of people listening would know, is a really, really hard thing to do this day and age. But yeah, I've been super fortunate to have John, and then I also have a great management who found John for me, and their name's Tribe, and they look after Sakr and Sam Sakr, the producer artist. So I am incredibly fortunate that I have a team that support my creative endeavors and creativity. So I released that EP, and I have another EP to write to release through Platoon. And that's what I'm doing for the next 2 months. So I have 2 months to write a whole EP, and then I head back to Australia to play a festival, and then I come back here.
I think it's a very challenging but also stimulating perspective, the one of having 2 full months to dedicate. I mean, having a deadline is always, I mean, at least to me, is very beneficial when you're trying to
I yelled at my
something
team.
out.
I literally yelled at them. I was like, I need a deadline, otherwise it's just never going to get done. I'll just procrastinate. I'll procrastinate like there's no tomorrow. So I think 2 months is enough time. I think it's a bit scary because you know, my last EP I wrote over the space of like a year or 2 or something. Like it was like a long time. So to put it all in 2 months is going to be an absolute challenge. But I'm excited to kind of just like live in that world for 2 months. It's with this the EP that I released. I kind of got what I called creative whiplash, because I would only work on the Sakr stuff in the moments few and far between the writing and producing stuff. And they're such different headspaces, they're such different processes, that when I did get that moment to do Sakr stuff, my brain couldn't adjust properly to it, because I'd been in like these other worlds so much.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really curious, and I'm really, really excited how I approach. I have 2 months to just live in this artist project of my own. It's either going to go really well or really bad. it's one or the other. I don't know if there's going to be an in-between.
But I found that when you're working on something to express yourself and something like for you first and foremost, I think that there is like the biggest threat is to underestimate how interesting your music is, because it is something that I found when I was playing for. I was in studio for a friend's project, and I had to record a very like a modular improvised piece, and I had only half an hour before we had to disband everything, and you know, that was the end of the studio day. So I spent the previous months trying to figure out what to play and what not. And I just went there and played something that I was already familiar with. And to me, it was kind of boring, my comfort zone. But the point is that they didn't know that. So, and this is where, and I was like, but why I've been able to put something, which is okay, reasonably good, at least for the purpose, in just 20 minutes. And if I have something to write for myself, it may take years because I am never satisfied with that. And I realized that there is a sort of offset between what is your current research interests as a musician and what you're capable of playing. And what you're capable of playing may sound a bit stale for you because you already moved on to the next stage, but it's not for the audience. So I learned that it's okay to record something that is already old for you because it's not for the listener.
It's such a, I completely understand what you're talking about, and it's such a battle. It's such a battle because like this thing that you've done for maybe years is your ears and your creativity is so accustomed to it that you've probably yourself have been searching for something new. And like when you're in like a high pressure situation, you just lean on those things that like the back of your hand, right? But to the listener or to the people in the room with you, that even if they're a friend, they might have only experienced it a few times. So for them, it's still like new and exciting and whatever it may be. I have this thing where whenever I like make something, like an idea or a draft of something or whatnot, I try and remember the feeling I had when I'm listening to it now, because I know in like X amount of months when it's time to mix it, I'm probably going to hate it. Because you hear it so many times, you've gone through a million different variations of it. It's like this, it's that. But I always refer back to that moment where I've like was really excited in the studio about it, because that's what people will experience when they first hear it. And I feel like that's the same with your creative ideas and your general habits of where your hands go. It's just kind of it's a part of you. But I think that like people might just like really resonate with that part of you. And while it might be boring for you, it's definitely not going to be boring for them. And then you're always on a exploratory, curious, walk with what you do. So you're always trying to open up a different box. But, I kind of like the fact that there's always some sort of thread that is fed through each box that opens. And, for me, it might be I might sound a particular way all the time. And the same for you. You might always gear towards a particular sound or instrument, you know what I mean?
And I think that this is the right moment to edit your patch in and hear what sound you're currently leaning towards. And so we will meet in a few minutes after hearing Sam Sakr patch and patch breakdown.
Okay, so I'm going to talk through this patch. I am clearly a messy patcher. Often when I'm making just a piece with the system itself, there's no preconceived idea of what I'm going to do. I kind of just start and kind of let it speak back to me and go from there. So kind of results in this mess. It also results in I don't really remember what I did, so explaining it is going to be a learning experience for me and hopefully you. First, I thought I'd talk about how I'm sequencing everything, because it was off screen. I'm using this Torso T1 sequencer, and that's handling some of the rhythms and the melody. That's going into a MIDI to CV converter. So what I thought I'd do is talk through it sound by sound and explore what's going on for each sound. So I'll start with this sound, which is the textural percussive element throughout the patch. This is done with the Brenzo's yellow oscillator. It's coming out of the final output, and then there's a bunch of modulation and things being fed into it to give it the sound. First, its pitch is being offset really low, so it's not really in pitch range. It's more in like LFO range. But there is a subtle bipolar stepped random that is moving it up and down, which you'll hear if I play this. So as you can hear, when it gets like quicker and slower, that's just that stepped random. And I'm turning that down and offsetting the pitch to be really low via the 3-2-1 module. And the stepped random is coming from marbles. Another three important elements to this part of the patch is I have some noise, which I'm obsessed with noise. I like gritty textural stuff. I have some noise coming from the noise and filter going into the 3.0 FM input, and that's turned all the way up here. I have more bipolar stepped random going into the wave folder and the wave folder source. And then you'll also hear that there's like quite like a hi-hatty moment to this sound. That is directly from the noise and filter going into a VCA, and then I have a short attack decay envelope from Just Friends going creating that hi-hat sound. Another point to mention is the quad stereo channel has an option where you can use two mono sources on one channel and use the pan parameter as a volume knob. So I have it set so it's all the way listening to the yellow oscillator, and then I have some modulation opening it up, or moving it so we get more of the hi-hat, which is here. So it's just doing this, so we hear hi-hat and then don't hear hi-hat. Cool, so that's that sound. The next sound maybe we can look at is the melodic element to it. So this is the first melodic sound. That is the green side of the Brenzo. It's the triangle output. And that's going, what's being fed into it to give it the noisy sound is more noise, as I do, into the 3.0 FM. The amplitude is being controlled by Felistri, and that's going into the verbose scan and pan. I have another random bipolar stepped modulation going into the attack parameter of the attack decay envelope from Felicity. So sometimes it's a bit sharper, and then other times it's slower on the attack. That sequence I have also going through Felicity's slew limiter here, and I have a slight glide down. So pretty simple. What else on that sound have I done? There's more. Oh, the panning. The panning is a simple, just an LFO going into the pan of the verbose mixer. So I also have on the green oscillator on the Brenzo the sawtooth output going into the flip-flop on the Felicity, which is putting it down an octave. And that's going through a filter, and it sounds like this. And I can, open and close a filter, some more like performative things to let more harmonics through, build tension, interest type thing. The melodic stuff's pretty simple on that part. I have one other melodic element, which is the harmonic oscillator, which is this really subtle, like RP sounds that's coming in and out. Again, it's just a slow attack decay envelope going into the quad stereo channels VCA, which is opening and closing it. And I've just got the third, sixth, and eighth harmonic half open. Again, I wanted it to be quite subtle. When I was doing the patch, making the patch, I was feeling like there just needed to be a real subtle element that's working with the main melodic progression. So that's where I ended up. Nothing too crazy going on there. So the next bit is the kick drum, which is, you've been hearing the sidechain the whole time, but without the kick drum. You can hear that pole. I can make it more dramatic here. Cool, so what's going on there is I have obviously a trigger, and that's going into a filter 8, which is just a filter that's being pinged, which is creating the kick sound, which sounds like this. Yeah, that trigger is been malted, and I have it going to the green side of Felicity, which is going into the exponential FM of the filter to create the click sound. And then I have another malt of that trigger going into another envelope called Javelin. And that's the envelope that allows me to control the sidechain shape. That envelope output is going into the 321, and then I'm inverting the envelope so it turns stuff down rather than up. That inverted envelope, I'm sending to a 333, so I have a mult of it that I can send to different VCAs across the track so I can turn stuff down. And that's what's creating that pumping effect against everything else. So we can hear. Dramatically, it's like, yeah. So that's sort of what's going on in the patch. I hope I explained that well. Yeah.
I think I found two very interesting elements in your patch that I would like to briefly expand. The first one is like the most striking is the use of Brazos yellow oscillator in sub audio rate. So basically, we are when you say that you're using a bipolar random control voltage from marbles, if I recall correctly, you are patching it to modulate the frequency of this kind of LFO, right?
I'm patching marbles to a 321. The 321 is offset quite in like negative, so like the pitch is way like really low, and then I'm adding a little bit of so you know I'm sending this bipolar stepped random modulation, but I'm like turning it down so it's only moving this much rather than this, you know, and then that's offset all the way down. And then what that does is because the yellow oscillator is now in that like low sub audio rate, you get the clicks from the waveforms. And I really love the sound of it out of the Brenzo. And I think it's because you can modulate so much of like the wave and what's going on. And then what that bipolar random modulation is doing is just making those clicks go like faster and slower, essentially. That in terms of when it's going to that pitch, the pitch input, volt per octave,
which is something that was really unexpected. But I think it's a very valuable patch tips for everyone who's listening, because basically we are using the wave folder and the wave shaping tools to modulate a very slow voltage. So we're not hearing the timbre, but we're like hearing how the voltage changes almost like in real time. The other thing is the noise over the through zero FM inputs. I don't remember if you are using the same trick also over the yellow oscillator, or if it's just like a timbre processing of the green one, like the melodic one.
Noise is going to both.
To both.
It's quite subtle on the yellow oscillator. Again, it's one of those things where I don't understand why it does it, but if I just put a bit there, the sound just does something else. I think it probably just lets a bit of noise through. This was kind of the feeling I got from it. I am absolutely not going to pretend like I know what's happening with all that through zero modulation stuff. But it's doing something very, very prominent on the green oscillator, which is the melodic side of what's going on. And I reckon 70 to 80% of the time I'm using an oscillator, I want to run noise through it. Just because noise is great. I love it.
And it's not the same as mixing the noise afterwards, because it modulates the very oscillator's waveform. So the way it reacts also depends on the position of the waveforms at that time. So there is a sort of combined action between the two audio sources.
Yeah, totally. Again, like it's this, it's that beautiful nature of like Eurorack. It's just this like everything is collaborating. There is everything is working together. But that's I think that I often use Brenzo. Brenzo I love as like a melodic source, like that's singable. But the textural nature of that oscillator, I really like lean into all the time. I've spoken about it a few times with people and online. Just using it as like a texture generator. It's just so much fun. But yeah, that's those two sounds of the patch.
I like it because it kind of proves my point with in an argument with Simone, like a discussion we had over frequency modulation sources, and it's the second time a featured artist on this podcast proves my point, because a couple of episodes ago we had Tim Davies, another UK-based producer, and he was using Sapel's random noise to modulate his filter's cutoff frequency, because he said that it's not the same as mixing noise and the filter, and he does things over the cutoff frequency, and which is something that I like doing. And and I also like to patch my noise to the through 0FM of the Brainso. I made a few videos on that back in the days when Brainso came out, and I think that noise is an incredibly underestimated source in
it's
the world of modulation.
It's so underestimated. I'm obsessed with it. There's actually there's a company that's got like some really like cool noise module stuff. Sauvage or something engineering. Have you seen it? They're like they look like the like very mean, like they're like metal modules. Like I don't know, like they're black and like big knobs. I can't quite remember the name of it, but they have like they're very focused on like noise. From what I've seen, and I just think that like I'm really into like organic sound messing with this like clean parts of like a sine wave, or even like a sawtooth or square, like harmonically rich sounds, that it's like noise is just so like organic. You hear it everywhere all the time, just in like natural world life. That like there's something that just like hits home around this section of my body when noise is a part of it. And yeah, I can't get enough of it. Even like honestly, even noise from like things that are almost annoying, kind of makes me feel okay. Like even like digital module noise. Yeah, like even that, I'm like, oh, kind of, I'm there for it. I'm cool with that sort of stuff existing. Clicks and pops in recordings, I'm like, that happened. Like, oh well, like it's fine, unless it's like a vocal or something that's like very like, needs to be quite clean. But for the most part, I really love mixing noise with things. And yeah, noise on a filter is awesome. It's just, yeah, it adds that noise, but in a different way. I not often am I just adding noise like to the sound, if that makes sense. I'm using noise within it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that really works, and is something that everyone should do way more of.
So I see that you have, is that Super 6 you have at the back, the UDO?
Yeah, the UDO. Yeah,
it's a lovely synthesizer. So before since we are approaching the end of this episode, I would like to know, how do you approach the classic keyboard synthesizer, which is because it is something that I've been asking myself quite a bit. I mean, because sometimes one reaches for the Eurorack synthesizer as the ultimate freedom kind of thing, but then you put your hands on a very well crafted keyboard synthesizer, and there is still something that captivates you. So
yeah.
I would like, but I still haven't found the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have it for you, but I think what I still love about closed instruments is that they're instruments. So similar to like holding a guitar. It's like you play a guitar or sitting at a drum kit or whatnot. It has a particular sound. It you practice where to move your hand when you want something to change. Things become like playable, or like how the modulators work on it or whatnot, and you actually like physically get accustomed to the physical nature of that instrument. I think it would be similar to Eurorack, but once patched. So you know when you have a patch and you perform your patch, there's this like short-term muscle memory of where to go for what thing.
Yeah.
And then you rip the patch apart and you build another one, and then you have a new form of short-term muscle memory. What I like about like the UDO and all the other synths I have, there's a bunch of synths here which you might see, but you learn to play it. And then with that, you also learn where, like, if there's particular sounds you need or want to go for, I'll be like, I need to get to my Super 6 for that. Often, like, this is super great for, like really lush pad stuff and really, like, wide sounds. And, like, you know, gross sort of unison bass stuff. Which, you know, polyphony in Eurorack is quite a mission. So
I still think it's not worth it.
It's not at all. No, not at all. I also think like Eurorack doesn't have. I'm still like switching between sequences. I haven't found like the playing part of like Eurorack yet. I think that, you know, we have knobs, and sometimes there's like buttons and some like touch plates or whatnot. But, you know, like, and this could just be because, you know, we've been around music for so long, or what, like we've just used keyboards, right? But there's something like physical and how you play a keyboard and how the hand works on the keyboard that it makes sense, and it feels sort of like inspiring to play. That's something I don't quite get from Eurorack.
That's the same.
So like it's you know, sometimes if I want to write like a chord progression or something like even just like quite emotive, where like, you know, I want to play soft and hard and then this and then that. I'm gravitated towards using this. And then, you know, I know there's the whole like you could go and like get like a MIDI keyboard that has CV outs for like mod and velocity and this and that, but that's just a bit long, you know what I mean? Like it's just it's you need it to be immediate. As I said, I just flick everything on and go, you know. You need to have that.
Because with the Eurorack, it's fun to spend a lot of time into designing your sound, but it's not as fun spending so much time into designing your own controller, because that's just not fun. I mean, if I have to set up my piano, if I have to, you know, my piano on the back has some weak keys, I just call the tuner, the tuning guy. It comes over, I pay him, and that's it. I don't want to have this kind of problems in my life, you know. And so it's not fun I don't want the responsibility of a poor controller. Of my instruments. I just want to pay somebody who does that for a living. Yeah. You know?
Totally. And I think that like I just have that like across the board. Like I'm okay not being able to like control my Eurorack system in that way. I just don't think it's lent that way. So then you know, all my instruments have like, you know, obviously this is like my keyboard synth, if that makes sense, and then I have a bunch of electron devices, and I as long as it took, I really like the electron sequencer workflow, and how they work, and I use that in like the sequencer world. What I have found though is I don't really like sequencing my Eurorack with an electron box. I don't know why. At the moment I'm using a Torso T1 for sequencing Eurorack. I'm enjoying it, but I don't know if it's these. I've been through some sequences, man. So I'm just like, I'm still trying to find the way. Yeah, I've always thought about having like a sequencerless Eurorack system. Like it's just not got one. But I think I'm too drawn to melody and stuff that it's probably not a great thing to think about.
I did it for a while. I recorded a couple of albums either by myself and with friends with a sequencer-less setup, and it was very fun. It was very pretentious, but but it was very fun. And this was the moment where I reached the peak, the lowest peak of my disillusion towards Eurorack controllers, and I was like, no, I'm gonna leave forget about it and just play with knobs. Yeah. And I mean that was a very good exercise because I learned that some modules need to be tweaked in certain ways, and you cannot just tweak all the knobs in this, which may sound obvious, but I remember that Todd Barton once said that on the Buchla system, you need to tweak the knobs as slow as you can when you're performing to make sure that the timbre transition is not too abrupt. But then I found that this approach doesn't work, for example, on Hordijk modules, for example, the Benjalin or so on, because they are so unpredictable that they require just some pinches here and there and a very more immediate interaction. But then again, I switched back to a sequencer that when I realized that it can just be a voltage source and not necessarily bound to melodies and so on. So I've been reconsidering my opinions. But since we are speaking about the ideal module that doesn't exist yet, I would like to ask you our final question for today, which is if you could decide what could be the next Frap Tools module, what would it be? Or modules. I mean, some people had a list of...
So I obviously I knew this question was coming, so I've been having a tiny think. And I don't know if they are good ideas, but I have two. One is the selfish one is more of an idea. But the selfish one would be, I would love half a Filistri.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want just so it's maybe like a 8 HP, 10 HP, half a Filistri. If you can fit the slew limiter on there, awesome. I think that would go a really long way. Because I don't have like a massive system to get a whole nother Filistri. I could probably justify it if I thought about it long enough, but I'm always just wanting one more half of a Filistri. My other one is I would love a Frap Tools take on. Have you something like the Tides module by Mutable or Just Friends by Mannequins, which is essentially they have like an LFO or a Tacticate envelope that can be trigged or clocked. But you can, and they can happen. So say there's 8 outputs, they can happen together, or you can shift. So when you receive a clock, one of them is doing a Tacticate when the clock's being sent, and then one of them might be. It essentially becomes like a divider or a multiplier. Okay. What I don't even know if this is actually possible, but what would be amazing, and because Frap Tools are not afraid of super big modules, It would be so cool because like the ones that I have this sort of like concept and idea, the attack and the decay are like global. I thought what could be cool is if you can imagine like 8, attack decay things, and then still being able to do that. So it's like this like multiplier divider of envelopes and LFOs, and they can like work, like they can cascade or whatever that may do, but they each have their own shape. But then what's really cool is these can go like if it can go into audio rate and we get that Felicity-esque oscillator. But because these things are offset, there's like a mathematical result to when they're playing. So the first output would be the fundamental, but then the second output might be like a fifth below that if they're going slower.
I see. And how would you define the ratio of the individual envelopes? It would depend, I mean, on their... Is there a sort of delay stage at the beginning, or they're just going slower?
What do you mean? Is there a decay? They don't start. No. They would start when it's not that they're going slower. It's that they start like at different times. Okay. Wow, that's a very interesting concept, especially when you start bringing in like audio rate kind of things. Indeed. Especially with multiple waveforms. Yeah, that's what I would love. I don't even know if that's possible, but that's what I would love. The only limit is probably space, because but as you said, we are not afraid of big modules. So yeah, that's a very interesting. And how would you incorporate such a module in a patch? To what kind of effects provide? Well, I think like you could almost get like a whole drum groove out of that if they were in I see. Clock divided. Having like a kind of like a control over like almost like global control over all the envelopes going on in one patch. Being able to speed things up and slow things down, because in my head there's like a global knob as well, because I'm making this up as I go along. So you could like shape them all. So you might have one with like a slightly slower decay, one with a fast decay, and then there's like a knob that goes, okay, in relation to where these parameters are set, they go it goes quicker or slower or whatnot, like a global offset kind of thing. So that could be cool, really cool for melodic parts, because it's all intertwined. And then what is cool about like the audio rate part, which is what I use a couple of these modules for, is you can kind of fake chords, which is really, really nice to do. Yeah, almost like in the Trautonium's fashion, like the Mixture Trautonium, where you use just a very high-pitched sawtooth, and then you make chords out of the frequency divisions. Yeah, I sort of do that with the harmonic oscillator. So it's a similar approach. The only difference is that when you're working with harmonics, you have like the major scale, and when you work with overtones, you have the undertones. Sorry, you have the minor scale of, I think, a fifth below, because if you divide the frequency of C, you play in F minor kind of thing, like with the minor natural intervals, which is very weird kind of sound, but I like it. I haven't explored that. It sounds a bit too smart for me. I mean, no. If you have, I do that with Felicity. So if you already have one, I programmed a sequencer
With raw voltages. So step by step, I detuned the oscillator so to match, like using it as a what was the mangrove, the mannequins, the other.
Oh, I saw this
Queen's
video.
color.
Yeah. It's like that, the
And
formant shifting down.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but on the module, you're suggesting you would have like 8 voices like that at the same time.
Yeah, with individual outs, obviously. And then you can, do what you want with them.
Nice.
I think that would be, I mean, like, it's, like, obviously, like, something like Just Friends, but like Frap Tools take, which something like
Yeah.
bigger, more control, analog, if that's possible. But yeah, I just think that would be really, really fun.
Yeah. So I think that we can cap it here for today, Sam.
Cool. Thank you so
And
much.
it's been a lovely conversation, and I really cannot wait to put into practice the idea that we discussed in my studio patch. So I will edit my take on Sam Sakr's sound after we say goodbye. And for now, I thank you very much for having been with us today, Sam.
Thank you, Giovanni. I really, really appreciate it.
So the first element that I wanted to incorporate in this patch was the textural sound, as Sam called it. And I used more or less his same technique. So I used a sample and hold from Sapel, offset it through the 321, patch to brainstorm volt per octave, and use the final output to a filter, in this case a high pass filter from the Kunsa. I used the pink noise to modulate the yellow oscillator core through 0 linear FM, and I patched another sample and hold to the modulation bus input and routed it to the source and to the wave folder. On top of that, I used the Kunsa filter in high pass mode with a very generous saturation and a bit of resonance to give it this very satisfying crunchy texture that I am controlling with another sample and hold signal as well. That is coming from this other section of Sapel, which is triggered by the kick drum, which we will talk about right now. And just like Sam did, I used a pinged filter, but I did not ring it, so I did not patch trigger signal to its input. Instead, I let the resonance full on, like this. And then I passed it to VCA that I used just as an on-off signal with a gate that opens and closes it, almost chopping the kick drum tail. And then I passed the kick drum through Bagai to add some degree of bit crashing and downsampling to it, which I like quite a lot, and I think it pairs very well with the textural element. They add different degrees of crunchiness. And 2 more elements. I used the green sawtooth wave to provide this kind of lead sound. As you can hear, it is being sidechained by an envelope triggered by the kick drum. The sidechain goes to every sound, including the reverb, except the textural effect. And I thought that I could have used octave division just like he did, but instead I choose to incorporate another element of his patch, which is the arpeggio, in the same voice. So what I did is I patched the square output to Falistri's input. I set Falistri to transient mode, super fast, very exponential shapes to give it a more a richer harmonic content. And then I used, which sounds like this. But then I used the control voltage track on the Usta to change the duration of the decay time, and since the green generator is set to reset on rest, I am creating a sort of formant arpeggio over the bassline, with the actual bassline. And you can hear that it sweeps up and down. Another thing that I added is to control voltage track, same on the Usta sequencer, that mimics this same behavior and controls the send level of this track so that the bass is dry, but when it gets higher, it also fits the reverb. I also used Sam's trick of programming a kind of cymbal-like track with the noise, but in this case, since I ran out of envelopes, I just used a gate track straight into the 411 control voltage input, and I can blend it with the main source like this. To make the sound more interesting, I programmed a gentle variation over the gate length on the Usta sequencer so that every strike has a different length. The patch altogether sounds more or less like this. And this wraps this episode of Let's Talk Music with Frap Tools up. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I encourage you to go and check the other ones. If you missed them, you can find them on your favorite streaming platforms as well as on YouTube. My name is Giovanni Grandi, and I will see you next time here on Let's Talk Music with Frap Tools.